walk us through searching and finding joy.
Yeah.
Right? Like at some point I have to say, okay, and this is a theme that I hit on a lot, that no matter what has happened to the person I'm sitting with, whatever pain they've gone through, treated differently, beat up, lost a child, whatever has happened, at some point we always land on the same question: what are we going to do now?
Right.
What are you going to do now? Right. And there's not any discourse about intentionally seeking joy. There's discourse on retribution. There's discourse on going backwards. There's discourse in sitting. There's nothing about saying, okay, where do we go? And that's where this showed up. That's why I was literally reading this and throwing my hands up in the air.
Yeah.
So talk us through what joy is. Talk us through this idea of going to get it.
Yeah. Well, kind of the flyover journey of the book is the first part is what we've been talking about, how the modern pursuit of health has been to throw people back inside themselves through a status game, through self-esteem. And that's not gone well. And it's just fragilized us as we've described it. So the next step, I argue, is to just step away from the self. And this is why you're seeing the rise of things like mindfulness. Just to minimally grounding oneself in the current moment in reality. It is helpful to just stop the inner drama. But I also talk about research on humility. And humility is this huge factor, capacity that social psychologists are looking at. And humility isn't denigrating oneself, but it's rather just not thinking about yourself a lot. It's a self-forgetfulness that's grounded in a stable identity. Humble people can be self-forgetful, can be focused on other people because they're not wrapped up in their own status game.
I remember meeting the first time, it was a famous UFC fighter.
Yeah.
And I remember being so caught off guard by his body energy. Because I expect he had a tattoo on his head, a mohawk, just a big bad dude.
Yeah.
And was so kind.
Yeah.
Weirdly so. To where it was unmooring. It wasn't what I expected. And it wasn't until I was on the flight home that I thought, oh, he can beat up everyone on planet Earth. He has nothing to prove.
Exactly.
He can just look you in the eye and say, how are you?
Yeah.
He's got no radars going off everywhere. Like, where do I stand? Who am I? How much money do I? Right. I can just enter a space, right? And I remember being so like, how do you get that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And monks have the same thing. Like, it's being able to enter that space.
The symptom or the sign of humility is like this tranquility.
Yeah.
That there's a social tranquility, that I'm not in any sort of competitive or rivalrous game of comparison with you. But you only get there because there's an inner tranquility.
Man, okay.
And so that's the last part of the book, which is this how the research is pointing us towards not inside of ourselves, but toward transcendent, outside of ourselves. So that's the shape of joy, not being curved inward upon yourself, but being curved outward. And joy is an example of that. So psychologists debate joy. What is joy? And there's the psychologists that define joy as, we've talked about, an emotion. Good things happen, and I feel joyful. Okay, that's the trouble with that is...
It feels pretty thin.
Well, it means that you're only going to be as joyful as well as your life is going. So there's no resiliency there. But joy is a transcendent emotion, a joy that is durable in the midst of ups and downs of life. That's the joy of kind of a transcendent joy, encountering a reality bigger than my own. And so the question about how to get there is, and this goes back to meaning in life as well, is being able to tell a bigger story about yourself, to be able to connect your story and your life to a narrative that goes beyond or is grounded beyond realities that are independent of whether or not I can run my track meet in 40 seconds, or whether or not I am making a certain dollar amount, or whether or not I am winning some game of significance. And that makes sense to religiously inclined people who have typically grounded their worth in a transcendent story. Jesus says, right, lay up your treasures in heaven, right? Locate value in a transcendent source, in a sacred grounding. That gives me some degree of resiliency. So the story I tell in the book, I'm a prison chaplain, and I tell the story about Mr. Kenneth, who's one of the inmates there, who just has this profound joy despite objectively miserable circumstances. And so his joy isn't a reaction to life, but it is something that carries him across the waves of misfortune.
Is that a discipline?
I think it can be practiced, because if it's not practiced, if it's not a capacity, like you said, or a muscle, then we're just
becomes something you stitch on a pillow, right?
it either becomes that, it becomes trivial. It's like you are worthy sticker, or you got this affirmation on Instagram, or we are like trying to talk our way into it. Yeah. And I really do think there is this is kind of American conviction that we can somehow talk our way into mental health. But if you ever try to talk a child into a better view of themselves, like if you ever tried to like yell self-esteem into a child or talk self-esteem in your child, or you just realize those words just kind of bounce off us. Right. So it's got to be practiced.
Yeah. That's so counter to what we've been told.
Right.
That I have any agency. Because at the end of the day, what you're saying is I make a choice to choose this path, or I make a choice to remain here.
Right.
And that is not what we're sold. We're sold, this happened to you. The world owes you.
Right.
And then the world's going to come take care of you. Right. For me, one of the meta lessons, and both political parties participate in this, and there's a reality to this, and I know I'm dumbing it all down, but we are not designed just to sit at home and receive checks. Like, people go crazy. You go crazy. We don't have purpose and value. Of course there's, but it was just for me, this utopian that I've got mapped out there, that the human being is not designed for that. Right. There's got to be this choice narrative in there. And then you got to break choices down into a series of, I don't know, thoughts and actions and relationships, right? This is very unsexy.
Well, yeah, because we used to have a name for it. So in the ancient world, it was called a virtue. And a virtue is something that is acquired, it's practiced, you have exemplars, it takes effort, it's developed over time. And we don't think about that anymore. We think virtue is just something holy people do, rather than the art of living well. That's what virtues mean. Virtue means excellence. And so the art of living well, and so we don't train ourselves to live well. And some of the virtue, so think about a virtue, the virtue of courage, or the virtue of perseverance, right? Those are those virtues that help us carry suffering and pain that we were just talking about. But in a therapeutic culture, you're not trying to acquire virtues. You're trying to alleviate a pain. And your point was that, but sometimes those pains are the very things that we have to endure downstream to get character strength. Yeah.
And I wouldn't wish them on anybody.
No, you wouldn't.
Yet they are.
Yet they are.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the difficult thing we're narrating here. We don't want to come off as unsympathetic to pain.
No.
And we don't want to look at a generation and go like, hey, kids today lack grit and resiliency. So I don't ever want to come off as like some sort of angry old man, like, like they're on their phones too much. Sure. Like, I don't want it to sound like that at all. I mean, I'm Gen X, and we weren't known for our mental stability. We're killing it from a mental health perspective. Yeah. So I really don't want to have a generational bias here. I want to practice a lot of generational generosity. So we want to name some things that are going wrong in our culture and call people to better ways of living, better ways of thinking about their mental health, equipping parents to not be so alarmed when their kids suffer and be able to sit with them in that without that being judgmental. Yeah. This is supposed to be a helpful intervention.
It just is.
I don't want any criticism of our current state of distress as being uncharitable or unsympathetic.
Yeah.
And yet, call people to resiliency.